In today's video, we have the latest NHL trade rumors from around the league, talking about teams like Montreal, Toronto, as well as Pittsburgh. Now we're also talking about Ottawa because we just got the announcement that they've signed Vladimir Tarasenko. That's likely going to lead to another trade within their team to create some space. We also have a big signing in Arizona as well, and some other news from around the league. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of news to cover today. We might as well kick things off with the news that just broke a few moments ago, and that's that the Ottawa Senators have announced they've signed Russian sniper Vladimir Tarasenko to a one-year deal valued at $5 million. He also gets a no-trade clause with that one-year contract. So this has been a long rumored deal between these two ever since the DeBrincat trade, and shortly thereafter when Tarasenko was in the process of changing agents, it was speculated that it was down to the Hurricanes and the Senators for this player. And of course, at that point, it was even speculated that Ottawa was more likely. Tarasenko may not have been, thrilled with his options out on the market, but fact is that's what was available. Obviously, Ottawa was looking for another goal-scoring winger after having to trade Alex DeBrincat, where he wouldn't sign a long-term extension. And of course, he needed a new contract of some sort. He was 1 year away from being a UFA, so as much as they preferred to keep him after what they gave up to acquire him, at least they were able to kind of recoup here, getting Dominic Kubalik and some other prospects and picks in that trade. And now they add Tarasenko in free agency. So you'd think overall Tarasenko and Kubalik should be able to compensate for what you have in DeBrincat goal-wise. He scored 27 goals for the Sens last year, where Tarasenko himself is a 6-time 30-goal scorer. Has hit over 40 once. Last year, he did miss a little bit of time, but he ended up scoring, I believe it was 18 goals between his time in St. Louis with the Rangers as well. Of course, changing teams, there's usually a bit of a acclimation period where it takes a little while to gain some chemistry. Ultimately, Tarasenko didn't do awesome in the Rangers, but he wasn't bad either. Certainly has shown the last few years after some shoulder injuries and some concerns that he can remain healthy and still be fairly productive. So all in all, this is a decent move for the Sens. However, it does create a tricky salary cap situation. For the first time in a long time, this is going to be a full cap team. The Senators are going to be right up against it now. The problem is they're not done signing their restricted free agents. So at this point, they still have yet to sign Shane Pinto, and they have yet to sign Igor Sokolov. Now, of course, Sokolov's not a lock for the roster, but could be, and obviously Pinto is, though, a lock for the roster, and they need to have space to do that. Now, Sokolov's contract very well could end up still being a guy who goes up and down for another season. Wouldn't be shocked if he gets a 2-year deal, where it's maybe a one-way deal for next year or something, and this year's a 2-way deal. I would suspect that might be something they work out, but Pinto is going to need at least a short bridge deal for 1 or 2 years at the very least. And it's, I don't know what the amount's going to end up being for Pinto. I would think $2.5 to $3 million is probably in that range. I mean, he was basically a 20-goal scorer in his rookie season. So we'll see how things work out. But if you look at the Sens roster, there's not a ton of options really for freeing up money. Now, I really think part of what delayed in making this signing with Tarasenko is I think they were kind of waiting to see what was happening with Matt Murray in Toronto, because they retained salary on that contract when they traded him to the Leafs. If the Leafs were doing a buyout, well, then they would have got some cap relief. They would have got over an extra $1 million in cap space, which would go a long ways right now. Ultimately, the Leafs and Murray worked it out so that he's not going to play next year. He's going to be on a long-term injury reserve based on recommendations from doctors. So, obviously, I know there's been a lot of controversy over that, where he was technically deemed healthy in the playoffs. But at the end of the day, if the team and the player agree based on doctors' recommendations that he not play, and that he is LTIR eligible, then that it is what it is. And unfortunately for the Sens, where they have retained money, they don't get any cap relief. As much as a lot of people don't like the Murray on LTIR situation in Toronto, it's probably the best case scenario for the team and the player. For the team, they get to exceed the salary cap by the full amount, rather than have some relief and a little bit of dead money on a buyout. And at the same time, for the player, he doesn't lose money because he's not bought out. So from that perspective, you know, it is what it is. And if it's really what's best for his health, then I don't think anybody has the right to complain about that. So they, you know, going back to the Sens here, they're not getting that extra relief they were probably hoping on, and I'm sure they weren't banking on it, but still, this is going to leave them with next to no cap space, and I don't know how they're going to free up some money. I would suspect players like Matthew Joseph, who signed, I believe it was 4 years at 2.9, didn't have a great year last year. I would imagine that he could be a player that they might be willing to move on from in the forward group. At the same time, like, you know, he does bring a lot of speed, penalty killing, and things like that, which obviously they're not going to have that for Tarasenko and Cooley. Obviously, Tarasenko and Cooley may or may not be there more than 1 year either, because they're both pending UFAs. So there's that. In the decor, they did sign Erik Brannstrom to a 1 year, $2 million contract. There was some talk he maybe could be moved because they do have some up-and-coming defensemen kind of pushing as well for spots, like, you know, such as Jacob Bernard-Docker and Lassie Thompson. Not to mention they'll have Chychrun for a full season. They still have Shabbat and Zub. They brought back Hamonic. Like, there's not, I wouldn't say there's a log jam there, but they certainly have the ability to maybe move one defenseman if need be. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do, because they're going to have to free up some money to sign Pinto. I do wonder if this is going to delay a Pinto signing. We'll have to wait and see how things fall out here. You know, for all I know, they could be making other announcements as I record this video, and I could be behind on the news. But as of right now, they've signed Tarasenko. It's going to lead to another move. What that move is, we'll have to wait and see. But if I had to guess, I would say probably a Matthew Joseph trade. But we'll have to see where things go. The other big news today in Arizona is they've signed their top prospect and former number 3 overall pick from last year's draft in 2022, Logan Cooley. Earlier in the offseason, Cooley had confirmed he was returning to school to go return and play for the Gophers for another year. That was after the Coyotes' arena deal had fallen through, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the franchise on where things were moving next. And he indicated that certainly played a role in his decision, but certainly things have changed for him. He said that once he went to the Coyotes development camp, he started to have a change of heart. I think that, along with the fact that he's seen the Coyotes make enough other moves to bring in some higher quality NHL players to make this team a little bit more competitive, probably changed his idea. Now, he's also rep by the same agent as Clayton Keller, and we know Keller and his the Bartlett brothers agents that represent him have had their concerns, and they've been not shy to speak publicly about those concerns. So clearly, I think that could have been some influence there as well. They obviously must be pleased, at least on a short-term basis, with what the team has done. But that's going to make things very interesting as well. You know, for the Calder race, it's going to make things interesting for that team being more competitive. So, of course, he gets a 3-year ELC like most rookies do. He gets the max you're allowed to get, $950 on the average AAV. But, of course, he has the ability to take that up a notch, an extra $3.5 million available to him in A and B bonuses that he's able to earn throughout the next 3 years. So that's a very exciting player. Like I said, last year, before the 2023 draft, he was voted and considered by many the top prospect that was affiliated with an NHL team that was not yet in the NHL. So you throw him in the lineup along with hopefully a full season from Dylan Gunter and some of the other NHL vets that they've brought in. You still got Nick Schmaltz there. He brought in Jason Zucker. Like, it should be a more competitive team. So we'll see how the Coyotes might be under the radar, team. I'm still not convinced they're going to make the playoffs or anything, but I think they'll, not necessarily be a basement dwelling team like many probably would have thought otherwise. So interesting to see how things move forward. In Montreal, still talk about the fact that they're trying to move Mike Hoffman and Muriel Armia. Those contracts are proven very, very difficult for Ken Hughes to move on from, even with retained salary. I know there was some rumors suggesting they may look to bring in Quebec-born forward Max Comtois, who was a RFA with the Ducks, who was not qualified and is now a UFA looking for a contract. He himself had, I think he was asked in an interview about the thoughts about playing in his home province and for Montreal, and seemed very interested by the comments, but the Habs have confirmed that they will not be reaching out and offering a deal. So that's one player they're not going to be bringing in. Like I said, right now they still have that log jam at the forward position. They absolutely need to move some players out, and at this point, considering how long it's been without Hoffman and Armia being moved, I suspect that it might take right up until training camp begins to see other teams, with some holes that might be willing to have a change of heart start and take one or both of them on or something like that. So we'll have to see, but Kent Hughes is still working away at that. In Pittsburgh, multiple things they're working on besides Erik Karlsson. We know they're one of the teams very interested in the star defenseman, and still, I think, by many considered to be the most likely landing spot, even though there's certainly other teams in the mix. I think Carolina, it's fair to say they're out of it now after what they've done for moves here recently, including getting Tony DeAngelo under contract. That's obviously extended Sebastian Aho long term, which didn't really have too huge of an impact on anything being done for the current season. But at the end of the day here, the Penguins have other things to consider, regardless if they bring him in or not. In goaltending, it appears as though Casey DeSmith is available. Like I said before, they signed Tristan Jarry long term. They also brought in Alex Nedeljkovic and Magnus Hellberg, who are both capable backups through free agency. They don't need that many goaltenders to play in the minors. It makes total sense here that his 1 year and $1.8 million contract would be something that Kyle Dubas and Pittsburgh are trying to move on from. So we'll have to see, between now and the end of the offseason. I would think that they're looking to move that. Also, with the Drew O'Connor contract being their last remaining RFA business, he does have a arbitration date coming up in early August, and I suspect that once that's completed and once that contract is settled, regardless if they're going to make a deal for Karlsson or not, we're going to see them use their second buyout window. It's either going to be Petrie or Granlund, depending on what's more tradable, or the combination of what's more tradable versus what kind of cap relief they're going to get. The Granlund contract does give them a little bit more savings, but at the same time, Petrie has trade protection in his contract where Granlund doesn't. So if they can find a team to take Granlund on, then he won't have a say over it regardless of where he goes and where that is. They could send him to San Jose, Arizona, Chicago, doesn't matter, and he can't veto it. Whereas Petrie has half the league that he can block. So they may they can look at that in either way and what they feel is more helpful, but I do suspect him to use that buyout on one of those two players, and then, like I said, on top of that, move to Smith, and that'll give them some extra cap space to work with as they continue their pursuit here for Karlsson. It seems like that makes the most likely, big deal that they're working on, besides anything else that they might have small in the hopper. I think they're, for the most part, done that way. They're still mulling over the possibility of extending Jake Gensel. There hasn't been much rumors as far as how that's going or if they're having talks yet or anything of that nature. But certainly another key player in Pittsburgh who's been there for a long time and been very productive, to see if they work out an extension and if he ends up staying. And in Toronto, of course, their second buyout window was slowly fading here, so it's starting to become uncertain and less likely that they're going to use it. I would have thought by now that with the Samsonov contract being announced on Sunday afternoon, that means that their buyout window would have opened 48 hours later, which would put us for Tuesday night. So basically, and I believe it's good for 3 days. So they'd have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Of course, Friday's coming up tomorrow. I don't know that they can put a player on waivers Friday, though. That's the only thing, because they wouldn't be cleared on unconditional waivers until Saturday. But that I don't know the exact rule on that. I don't know if they have to be cleared through waivers before the end of the window, or at least placed on it. Either way, it's either closed or almost closed, no matter the actual rule around that. So the fact that they've had a couple of days to place a player on waivers to be bought out and they haven't done it makes you think that maybe we're not treading that direction. I speculated myself that maybe TJ Brody might be bought out and re-signed. I mean, it wasn't me that started the speculation over Brody being a buyout candidate. There's been all kinds of media around the NHL talking about that possibility, but I wondered, based on Brad Treliving's history, if he would do that, but then re-sign him to a lesser amount. We've seen him do that in Calgary before, and I wonder if he might do it again in Toronto. But if that's not happening, then you have to think that the next move for them to be cap compliant, because they still need to clear over $2 million, that it's going to be a combination of Connor Timmins and probably Sam Lafferty, would be my guess, unless they have a bigger trade that takes place that has other bigger contracts swapping back and forth that levels out things cap-wise, that Timmins and Lafferty being traded for future-based assets, prospects, or that are not going to play right away, or draft picks or something like that, would be what they'd likely end up having to do. They do have enough defensemen and forwards that they theoretically could afford to move those guys. I don't know if it's really preferable. I know Timmins was more of a Dubas acquisition. Same with Lafferty, but Lafferty, you know, to me, he's got lots of speed, good penalty killer. I think he fits well there in their bottom six, and he's making more money than some of the other guys that you could put there, which sometimes is problematic, right? So we'll have to see what the Leafs do, but with the buyout window slowly closing, that is the most likely next move that we see. But again, like some of these other moves we've talked about, it could take time. It's hard to say. Like the trade market's been a bit of a standstill. The UFA market, of course, we got a signing today in Tarasenko, but there's still lots of names out there that are looking for work, and we'll have to see where things go as teams are still picking away here at trying to free up some money to do other business. But it's tight and tough with not much cap room to go around. Let me know your thoughts on all today's news down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.